Hello, everybody. Today I have with me Joel Vanderloon. And Joel is a super interesting guy who's led a super interesting life. And he's recently been on a television show called Loon, season 7. He has a survival school. He's been all over the world, both learning and teaching survival. And I'm thrilled to have you with us here today, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, James.
And you are going to do some elk hunting this fall.
Oh, yes. I am getting very excited. I have been working a lot on the calls lately and the Elk Nut app. I downloaded that recently and it has blown my mind. So I'm deeply engrossed in that.
It's pretty fun. And, we've talked a little bit about where you're going to go and the time of year that you're going to be in there. But of all the things that I've hunted, elk are just something that you can kind of participate with.
Yeah, it's there's so many similarities, it seems, between them and turkeys. And when I first started hunting turkeys in the States, I was infatuated with these animals. The fact that you could call them in and really learn to communicate with them is the part that is just so alluring, because there's nothing worse to me than trying to hunt when you are, or should I say, the style of hunting when you're just in one spot up in a tree stand, sitting in a blind and just waiting it out. So the fact that you can communicate and have that engagement with the animal just is very, very alluring to me. And so the fact that you could call in an animal the size of an elk, by fooling them into thinking that you're one of them. I mean, I think that's a huge accomplishment for any hunter. And God, couldn't think anything more exciting.
Well, I'll warn you in advance, in the same way that I was warned when I got to go hunt Tanzania. Don't do it. Just find something else to do with your life, because this can really take over.
Man, I could write you a book on all the things I've done like that my wife just rolls her eyes at, though. God bless. Yeah, God bless her. I've got a good wife that deals with those sort of things, all these addictions that I seem to suffer.
Well, and it requires a certain amount of addiction to achieve the type of knowledge or skillfulness that can be satisfying in some ways.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, I think that anything that is, what's the old saying, anything that's worth doing is not going to be easy. And, like hunting is such a good example of things in life which are not going to be achievable overnight. You're not going to be able to push a button, take a magic pill. There's just so many factors involved with becoming a good hunter that I feel like it is one of those things you just have to put in the time. And I find that anything in life that has that sort of challenge to it, I find that to be kind of what I seek out and what I tend to gravitate towards.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Well, so you were born in South Africa, right?
Yeah, correct. Born in South Africa, and then my parents separated when I was 8, and my dad moved up to Tanzania, East Africa. And so I'd schooled in South Africa, and then I'd get back up to Tanzania, usually twice a year, sometimes more. It tended to be around 2, sometimes 3 months a year that I would be up there. And then when I finished school, I moved up there permanently for a while.
Was he in Dar es Salaam?
First Zanzibar Island, first Mafia Island, which is actually part of the Zanzibar archipelago. And so that was very remote. And then from there, gravitated over to Zanzibar, just being a little bit more populated. And then to Dar es Salaam after that, where he was a sport fishing captain for most of his professional life there.
I got to go to the fish market in Dar while I was there at about 3:00 in the afternoon in October. And it was easily the smelliest place I've ever been in my life.
Oh, man.
It'll just, not only will it open up, your sinus cavity, but it really opens up your eyes to, as an American, to see, hot squid poured out on the concrete, and then people bidding on it. It's very eye-opening that this is a different type of city, different type of environment, and that smell that was from miles away. It was overwhelming.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. In fact, that's right next to the port, and we had to cross a ferry over across that port entrance to the southern part of Dar es Salaam, and then we had to drive around 45 minutes down to our property, which was off grid. But that smell, we'd have to drive through that every single time we came in or out of Dar City, But a couple things worth mentioning about that is a good thing we don't have bears in Africa, because otherwise you'd have bears ripping up everyone in the cities with a smell like that travels so far.
Absolutely.
The other thing is that, it really goes, like I've had this conversation a lot of times. And here in the US, I've noticed over the years living here that people have a fear of food spoiling. And the way what I grew up sort of eating and seeing, especially seeing the locals, the indigenous people eating, they don't have refrigerators because a lot of them don't have electricity. So they are storing a lot of food, it's going to be dehydrated, or it's just going to sit out fresh for a while before they get to cooking it. It's not just the fish markets. All of the butcheries are exactly the same. They will get a dead animal in that morning and it'll sit out all day long until it's sold. And, I've never been sick from eating the local food. I got sick from eating at, the restaurants catered for the wazungu, they call it, for the visitors. I've actually got sick there, I think, a couple more times than I have from eating the local food. So, I am a big believer in, and I know this is going off a little bit of a tangent, but it's kind of an interesting subject, I think, is that, you get a lot of bacteria growth, of course, on this food. Now, I do believe that if you get used to handling meat in that sense, meat that has been exposed to a bit of the air and the sun and people touching it, and you consume it, I do believe that is going to enhance your immune system. It's going to build up your gut biome, and it's actually in the long run going to make you a much more stronger person. When I say stronger, I mean a much stronger gut to warding off things like infections, and so I've actually always embraced that sort of thing. Go and buy some stinky fish and go and buy some meat that's, it's been hanging out for a while, particularly goat. That's a really good meat that a lot of Africans eat. There is goat, and eat it and enjoy it, and just sort of embrace the fact that, you're strengthening yourself in a way. And I know that there probably would be a lot of people that would argue against that, but it's just something that's fascinating. It's that the Africans are living that way, eating that way every day, and a lot of them are extremely healthy. I mean, they do suffer from things like malaria and that, but their immune systems tend to be pretty robust, especially when you talk about the Hadza Bushmen and the Maasai and them that live on a way more primitive sort of scale than that. So
I'm with you, and that's honestly, to an extent, the way that I grew up here as well. So when we killed deer and elk, we would hang them until they got moldy on the outside of the carcass. And then we'd take water and vinegar and wipe the mold off. And the mold was the cue that it was ready to cut up.
Gotcha.
And
yeah,
there's definitely times that we needed meat sooner than that. And we'd just get to cutting, right away or after it hung for a day or so. But there are other times that, I had animals hanging for 60 days and they'd be very moldy on the outside. And then as soon as you cut, that rind moldy layer off, the meat on the inside was beautiful and tasted amazing. And yeah, I was very healthy as a kid.
Yeah.
And I've never gotten sick from anything like that. I know there are harmful bacteria like E. coli and things like that can occur, but those are contaminants from another source.
Correct. And I don't, the viral and the bacterial side of things, I have no concern with those whatsoever. It's more the parasitic There's obviously certain animals which will carry certain things like trichinosis, etc., which a lot of the obviously hunters know about. But that is a concern for sure. That's legitimate. But for the most part, I think that we create a lot more of this fear than actually is really necessary. I think that you could get away with eating things which people wouldn't dream of and be just fine. My question for you is, when you drying it out for 60 days, have you ever, when you cut off that crust and you kind of get into the inside where it's still got some moisture in there, would you be willing to eat some of that raw, or is that just cooking it up?
Oh, that wouldn't scare me at all.
Yeah.
It's not something I've done. I've eaten raw meat off animals that I just killed, like as soon as I yard the guts out of it, and then I'll, pull out a chunk of tenderloin and eat it. And I think that that's really enjoyable on a number of levels. The palatability is very good, but it also feels good. And that's definitely something that I want to get into a little bit later is the feeling of killing an animal and how we react to that in sort of polite society versus survival society.
Sure.
But before we get into that, I would like to talk about the Hadza people, because I was around the Maasai and they were the most impressive people that I've ever seen in my life, but I was not around the Hadza. So tell me a little bit more about them.
Yeah, the Hadza, they are, from my understanding, they're the last true hunter-gatherers, but they are also the oldest Homo sapiens alive, in the sense that their DNA is the oldest that still exists, something along those lines. So in a nutshell, these people are pretty much living or examples of how you would have lived 10,000 years ago, or the closest example to it. They have obviously been a little bit influenced from outside culture, but if we wanted to look at more or less how we lived 10,000 years ago, they are the closest example to that we have. They live in a fairly small location up near a Lake Yasi, which is the northwestern part of Tanzania. And there are roughly about 1,000 or so of them left, of which, from what I understand, you're only looking at about 100, maybe 150 of them that are actually still living true to being a hunter-gatherer. So they have next to no outside influence in their subsistence. So they are still hunting, foraging for all their food, living completely in sync with the land.
That is so amazing and so attractive. Do they look physically similar to the Maasai?
No, they don't. So there is a difference in the diet. I would say the diet and the level of activity that they experience would probably influence how they have changed in their physical stature. The Maasai they're nomadic herdsmen and very, very impressive. In fact, a lot of the stuff that I learned there, the primitive skills, came mostly from the Maasai, because we had them working for us on the property, and I was just infatuated by them, and they would tell me all their stories. They live on pretty much a protein and fat diet. They ketogenic diet, really, to its absolute T. It's exactly what you would call a ketogenic diet. Milk, blood, meat. They do use medicinal plants, but their vegetation intake is very minimal. Carbohydrate intake is almost zero. The Hadza are actually, they have a very, very good balance, in my opinion. They're more of that Paleolithic type diet. They have a variety of berries that are available in that location. They have some root vegetables with crazy names. One is called etwa, which is very difficult to pronounce accurately. But these root vegetables are very starchy, and so they get some good carbohydrates from there. They get a variety of vitamins and minerals from things like the baobab fruits. They get a ton of sugar from the bees. So they harvest wild honey from two types of bees there mainly. It's the stingless bee and then the African killer bee. And well, that's a whole interesting fact on its own, is the whole influence of honey on their diet, and how they've built up resistance to the allergies caused by the stings and all that sort of thing. So they actually get a very good variety of food. And then, of course, the meat, the hunting with the bow and arrow, that's what they do. They don't really go into trapping much unless they need to. They are opportunistic hunters. So I've seen them kill things with clubs, stones, but they mainly are using their bow and arrows, which they make from scratch out there. And so from what I've witnessed, they pretty much will be eating a majority, very high protein diet. And then they will have their vegetation mixed in here and there. And of course, this depends heavily on the time of year, because up there it's the monsoon season. So it's either raining every day or it's bone dry. So that affects the animal movements, the vegetation, and all sorts of things. So their diet being so varied, going back to your question, the Hadza have a distinct athletic type physique. They're not excessively tall. They're not like bulky, but they are ripped and extremely strong. Their endurance is phenomenal. I pride myself on being an active guy that is, I would say, above average in fitness. I used to compete in mixed martial arts and triathlons, and I have had struggles keeping up with their endurance level. It's unbelievable the pace that they walk at. The Maasai tend to be extremely lean and very tall. And I think that goes hand in hand with what I was saying initially, their diet. So, the Maasai, in my personal opinion, have a little bit more of a limited diet, and that's why they tend to be skinnier and taller. But the Hadza, I think, have the ideal diet that all of us human beings should be striving to achieve. When you look at the physical conditioning that they have, their overall appearance, their vitality, their energy, and then you can even look at the scientific side, where they've been out there and they've studied the stool samples of the Hadza, and they've got, and I forget the exact number, but they've got way more gut bacteria than us. There's different types of gut flora that have never ever been seen in human beings apart from them. So, this is a whole subject you could talk about for ages. But that's the two differences with them physiologically and from what I've seen, and they both are very impressive, very, very impressive.
Yeah, and trying to keep up with the Maasai when they're really trying to get to a place is an impossibility for me. They can cover so much ground. And I definitely understand exactly what you're saying about the difference between the Hadza and the Maasai. Super interesting. I'm incredibly jealous of you for getting to have access to this type of knowledge, which we're about to lose forever if we're not very, very, very careful, and maybe even if we are.
Yeah, it hurts my heart, just to think of where we are. It's immersing with the Hadza and seeing their way of life, which is so simple. I mean, James, these guys, their entire life will own the following. They'll own a knife. They'll have an axe that they share among the family. They'll own a couple cooking pots, one set of clothes, the clothes that they wear on their back. And that's it. That's it. That's what they own. Everything else they own, they've made. They make with all the natural materials out there. So they don't place value in possessions. They're completely unrestricted and free of stress. And I mean, certain times of the year, they have things to worry about for sure, but they don't suffer stress in the same sort of context like we do. They don't have to have concerns about making money. They just have to focus on those few priorities, which is really what everything boils down to. They just got to keep warm, keep hydrated, keep fed, and that keeps them happy. So yeah, I feel like my time also on a loan, which you mentioned in the beginning, I had a lot more introspection and insight into that exact example I was just talking about, like how we have strayed so far from that, and we really are concerned with things that are often meaningless. We are so reliant on all the convenient things and the comforts, and we are, in a sense, becoming weaker, in my opinion. And these are all the sort of little profound realizations I had out there, and it all makes it very tough to swallow, because living in this modern environment that we're in now, we've kind of got ourselves too domesticated to the point where it would be devastating for most to actually step back and remove that. Just think about it. I mean, to take someone's phone away and say that's it, you're never going to be able to talk on a phone again. You're never going to have a man-made comfortable bed to sleep on again. I mean, there's certain things that people would rather choose to not live than be without. And I find that sad, because I'm caught up in it too. I'm no better than anyone else. If you told me we're going to take your car away and you'll have to walk everywhere, that's going to make a big difference in life, and I wouldn't be happy about it. So it's a very tough thing to really to face and figure out, how do you live in a world that is the way it is, and still try to have that connection with who we were, and have that connection with the natural world.
Well, speaking of things that are difficult to face, that a lot of people are struggling with right now, and this is one of two questions that I have left to ask you about the Hadza. What is their sense, or how would you describe their sense of mortality or fatality?
I don't truly know the actual science behind it, the realistic answer, but I can just tell you what my sort of suspicions are from speaking to them and from what I've witnessed. They don't live terribly long lives, so they don't have the lifespan that we do in the Western world, but they certainly do have a quality of life, in the sense that they are extremely fulfilled, proud people that have a very strong sense of community, and they suffer from next to no disease. There is no disease that I know of that they have an issue with. Even malaria, lucky for them, Lake Eyasi just doesn't seem to harbor that many mosquitoes, but they are there. But they have all of their elders who understand the natural medicines in the area to treat a variety of things that they would suffer from. And of course, they are going to, they're going to suffer the similar things to what any human being would, like, infection and that. But I do believe that a lot of their sort of their gut strength is what gets them through those sort of things. I've witnessed, and as an example, I've witnessed a young guy get shot with an arrow. It's a steel-tipped broadhead. I mean, if you want to call it that, they shaped them a little different. It's more like a spoon head. And he got shot in the leg, probably penetrated a couple of inches. And this is, of course, a rusty steel tip, which most of us would rush off to the hospital and go get a tetanus injection for, and still have a bit of fear about infection. And they just they pee on it, and then they're like, all right, good to go. And I went back there a year later, and when I saw him, first thing I said was, "How's your leg doing?" Shows me the scar, and he's like, "All good to go." So I think that their diet and their lifestyle just promotes their vitality in a way. But yeah, it's like, if you do break an arm out there, or you do have some serious traumatic injury, I mean, you're on your own, and they're not going to have any medical treatment, because they tend to just not want to go to hospitals if they don't have to, even though they can get access. Most of them wouldn't go.
Well, I'm confident that one day you and me are going to get to bow hunt together, and I just want you to know right now that if I get hurt, I don't want you to pee on me.
I wouldn't. When I saw the guy do that, I gave him. I was like, what are you? I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, yeah, no, it's good. It's good for it. I'm like, no, you have no clue what you're talking about. But if this is what you guys have been doing for centuries, whatever, just I'm going to let you be. But I do have some Neosporin here if you want.
There's another way. Oh, that's funny. But true to the point, if that's what's been, if that's how far we've gotten in the last 30,000 years or so, then that is the penultimate peak of the medicinal treatment for that type of wound. And obviously it's working. So, who am I to say?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the things they do are 100% anecdotal. They don't have any science to tell them any right or wrong. They just they do something. It seems to work. They do it again. And that's how it seems to go. They do have, like most Africans, they have a lot of sort of folklore, if you want to call it that, which obviously as Westerners, you would kind of raise an eyebrow and have suspicions. But, it is surprising how many things that they would do out there make total sense. But there's not really it's contradictory to what you have been told before, and there's a lot of examples out there. But they seem to know what they're doing, and I always kind of look at it as really primitive technology. I mean, they are so educated and so intellectual in a specific sense that we would look at as primitive. But if you compared, sort of the conditions that they're living in and the connection they have to the land, how they hunt, there is such a level of smartness and awareness out there that we do not have. Things like tracking. They literally read the ground like a book in a way that you've never seen anyone else do it before. And that is there's so much intelligence involved with that too, learning how to distinguish all the different animal tracks, and then of course tell what sex it was, the size, which way it was moving, if there was any injuries in the animal and how long it was there for. It's all these sort of things. This primitive sort of technology is just awe-inspiring. I mean, I look at them and I feel like a child that is back in kindergarten. Like I feel like they are the ultimate educators, and I just want to be like that little child sitting in the classroom with my hand up and ready to ask a million questions, because I feel like they've got it going on. They know exactly what it means to be connected and how to live with the land in a sustainable way.
Gosh, this is amazing, and I feel like it's something that I've just got to experience. I need some of this knowledge for myself. So this is something that we'll have to talk about and pursue later on.
Well, if you're okay with me just plugging in quickly,
absolutely.
So I run I after the first time I went out there, I decided there's probably a lot of people that would like to experience this sort of thing. So I do run. I don't want to call it a course. It's not a course. It's more of just an adventurous trip. Usually every year. It's been, with Corona, it's thrown things off. So I've pushed it from October to next year, May. I've got, I think, 3 spots left. I take 7 people, and we go and spend, it's close to a week with the Hadza, and we learn from them. And as long as you've got a reasonable amount of fitness, I'm prepared to take anyone. I've taken men, women. I've even had a kid that was, she was a teenager. She's probably like 12, 13, somewhere around there. And you get to literally step back 10,000 years and live amongst them and see exactly how they live, how they hunt, what they eat, how they communicate with each other, and you learn about their history, and it is captivating. And so, like I said, there's one coming up in May. So anyone who's interested can head on over to the website, take a look, and I can provide that link at the end if you want.
Yeah, I'll send it to me and I'll make sure and put it in the show notes.
Okay.
Yeah, truly an opportunity that simply isn't going to last long in the world. And yeah, the tracking that I experienced in Tanzania was very much like reading the book. And tracking is something that I do a lot of, right? Hunting is my profession here. but I haven't been inundated in it the way that somebody is who, that's their entire life, not even close. So what is a profession to me is more like a trifling hobby to somebody who does it as a matter of living. And to compare it to somebody like, let's say somebody doesn't know how to read and they've never seen writing before at all, and you showed them a book, that is most people's experience with looking at the ground and looking at the vegetation coming from the ground. It's meaningless scribbles. But once you learn how to read, there are layers of information even beyond what you're seeing there. So it's just a truly amazing thing and an interesting way to live your life, to know that there's that much more knowledge in your environment about what has occurred. The ground is trying to give you a history lesson for everything that has happened to it. And, some of us are able to read that lesson and others are oblivious.
Yes. And the thing that a lot of people, the sort of inaccuracy that a lot of people seem to experience is that they want to be very accomplished at all these sort of things, or hunting. They want to be an unbelievable tracker. They want to be able to make friction fire in all the different ways, and they want to be able to walk off into the woods with just a knife and then live off the land indefinitely. These are all very inaccurate goals, because if you look at the Hadza, for example, since they pretty much are old enough to walk and shoot a bow, they start shooting a bow. And they start making arrows, and this is something that they are doing every single day. So of course, if you stopped being a diesel mechanic, or you stopped being a teacher, or you stopped doing whatever your profession was and dedicated 100% of your time to doing what they did, chances are 10 years down the line, you'd be pretty damn good. And of course, that's the big difference, is that to do it as a hobby, and then sort of, have this romantic idea of just living off the land just one day would be an extremely steep learning curve and very, very difficult for the average person. That's what people mustn't forget, is that these people, these indigenous, are living that way. They've had the information and the training passed down from the elders to them, and this is their life. This is what they eat, sleep, and breathe. So of course they're going to be phenomenal at it. And I fell into that trap myself. Everyone wants to, be able to just walk out with the bow into the woods that they've never been in before and go and kill an elk on the first day. Everyone wants to do that, but it's just unrealistic. Now, if you've been walking through that terrain for years, and you understand exactly how big the herds are, how many animals, where they roam from each part of the year, if you know exactly the patterns of those animals, well, sure, then you could walk out there in one day and go kill an animal. But, and that's what the Hadza do. They know their land intricately. And so that's what I find very humbling, is that we do this as a hobby. You do it as a profession. A lot of people would, be doing it as a hobby and expect to have big results from their romantic dreams, which, my lesson from the Hadza is that it's just, we got to be realistic about things.
Well, speaking of walking into the woods alone, for those who don't know, is a very entertaining television show that's on the History Channel. It's on Hulu. It's on Netflix and Amazon. It's all over the place. Very fun to watch. And the premise is that, you take 10 folks and you give them 10 survival items and you drop them off at a location. And, up until this last season, it's been whoever stays the longest gets to win some money. And you were on this most recent season that's airing right now. So we know that you did not win $1 million, unfortunately. I'm sorry about that. But you put on quite a show. But the edited version that we got isn't quite consistent with the way you experienced it. So I have a bunch of questions for you about this, but, what are some of the differences between the way you were portrayed and your own experience with the actual events?
Yeah, it's there's so much to it. So I got to try and keep this concise. I don't believe I'd ever really be able to retell in detail my true experience out there, but I can certainly try. Regarding the edited version, there's hundreds of hours of footage submitted, and the production company and History Channel, which must be said, I have the utmost respect and appreciation for. I really have nothing but good things to say about them both. But they do have to tell a story that has to achieve two things. It has to be captivating and make sense to the audience, but it also has to be true to the actual participant. So they fight that battle with trying to do that in a way that makes, of course, thinking about those three things and keeping those three things in mind. They definitely do want to do justice to the participant. But what's more important is that they do have to create a storyline for that individual. They can't have two participants out there that have the exact same experiences. Like, that's why you won't see everyone catching fish in their gill net, and you won't see everyone shooting rabbits, and because they want to have differences for the viewers to look at, so they'll be able to distinguish the different participants. My storyline was created, I think, a little bit more about my character. There was obviously some footage used of me goofing around, and I of course, that's hard to watch, but I did do it. I filmed it. I was out there and entertaining myself with talking to a muskox skull and, giving a rabbit hunting tutorial and acting like a rabbit. And, I did those things because it was keeping me active, it was keeping my spirits up, and I was just having fun. And I tend to like to goof around anyhow. Did I expect them to use a lot of that footage? No, and they did. And so when you look at all the real sort of hard skills, like my shelter and the actual fireplace that I made with the flue pipe coming out, and they didn't show any of that. None of me building my shelter, making my fireplace. I caught a substantial amount of fish out there. They only showed a little short snip of that in, I think, the first episode when I was on. Shot a lot of rabbits, shot a lot of squirrels, trapped rabbits. I had a lot of issues with my gill net out there. And so I had to repair it each time because I was catching very big lake trout, which kept ripping my gill net up. So there was just so many things that happened behind the scenes that didn't get shown. And I was expecting it to be told, in a way where it focused more on those hard skills, but yet it was way more on sort of my character, my goofing around, and then my crafting skills. So it took me by surprise. Am I upset with the way it was edited? No, I accept it. I accept it for what it is. But the truth behind the difficulty of watching it is really not really about the content. It's about the psychological experience that you go through out there. There is no way that they can recreate that and show that in its true experience. They can't show that on TV. So what I went through out there was a very profound psychological experience, and that doesn't shine through in the editing. And I think that's the hardest part for me to watch, and that probably goes for almost every participant that spent a reasonable amount of time out there, is that true connection to self and to the land just really doesn't, the TV just can't do it justice with the editing. So.
Is there anything that you're glad they didn't show?
Yes, there is. I'm not going to give too many details, but I'll just leave it at this. I was able to shoot a substantial animal with the bow. And as you know, as a bow hunter, you can hit the animal in pretty good areas at times and still not retrieve the animal. Some animals will walk off for a long, long distance, and you might lose the blood trail and might not be able to track them down. And I had an experience along those lines, which was absolutely devastating. and I'm extremely grateful that they didn't show it. It almost caused me to tap out, and I managed to kind of work my way through it. But I'm extremely grateful that they didn't show that.
I'm sorry that happened. There's this very false understanding of hunting within hunters and without the hunting community as well, that all shots are lethal. And it's never been like that. That's never been part of the hunting experience for any animal. Every predator animal loses some of their prey animals. If they were 100% successful, that would offset the balance completely. And I think that there's a lot of hubris in modern hunting as well, where we tend to feel like an animal that is wounded and gets away, and we think the animal's going to die, but we don't find it. I often hear hunters say, "What a waste." And I think that there's a degree of arrogance in that, because while we don't get the benefit of harvesting that animal, it is not a waste. We're all carbon-based life forms, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of life that springs from that animal's death. And yeah, it's painful, and it's not the way that we want things to go, but it is the reality of the way things happen sometimes. And unfortunately, you were a participant in one of the ways that it went wrong, and I am sorry that happened to you. But I can also understand, that you're glad that you didn't have to, publicly go through that and have that be aired.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I love the way you put that, because it's along the lines of sort of the way my thought process went, because I was pretty beat up about it, and I had to kind of come to terms with it. And I came to terms with it in the sense that there are a lot of, especially when winter's setting in there, animals are desperate for food. And between the wolverine and the wolves and then all the small critters that run around, I knew that this animal would not go to waste. The bears, the list goes on and on. I think there's something like 12 animals that benefit out of every big, large game animal that dies out there. So the food chain takes care of it. And so in a sense, I love to hear you say that it's not a waste. I know why people would say it's a waste because you didn't retrieve it, but it's not a waste in the sense that some animal will benefit from that. It still is just a difficult pill to swallow. But I think that if you choose to be a bow hunter, especially a traditional bow hunter, that sense of sort of failure is going to happen. You just, the chances are high that you're going to have a bad shot every now and then, and you're going to have to live with it. And that's kind of the risk you take. You obviously try to limit it from happening, but there's so many factors involved that it just, I learned a lot from it, and it certainly will always stick in my mind from here onwards. So it's just something that comes to being a bow hunter.
It is. And it's been part of the human experience for 99% of the history of the human experience. Okay. What were your 10 items that you brought? And knowing what you know now, would that be different if you were to do it again?
Yep, that's a great question, and I have a pretty good answer for that, because I've thought about this quite a lot. So I took.
I bet you did.
So you know what? First off, I'll tell you the 10 items that I took worked out great for me, but I'll talk about a couple of things that would have changed. So sleeping bag, the negative 40 degree rated sleeping bag, which the sleeping bag is an absolute must out there. Sleeping bag and the fire starter and the axe. Those three, you're just not going out there without those. So I took those three. Fire starter, it's a ferrocerium rod. Some people call it like a fire steel. Flint striker. There's like a lot of terminology that people use, but it's basically just an alloy of magnesium and iron and a few other metals. Throws a good spark. So I had those three. I took a saw. I took a Leatherman multi-tool. So I did not have any fixed blade knife. It was just the Leatherman, which actually had two blades on it, one with a serrated edge, one with just standard. So I took a pot. I took the gill net, the bow with 9 arrows. That's all we allowed. The trapping wire, And what was the last? Oh, then the fishing kit. So that's, let me think, I think it's 100 yards, if I'm not mistaken, 100 yards of 20-pound monofilament. And then you're allowed 25 barbless hooks in that fishing kit. So those were the 10 items. The fishing kit was worth its weight in gold because, as I was saying earlier, my gill net was made out of monofilament and 20-pound monofilament. So it kept getting ripped up by these huge lake trout. I think the biggest one I got was probably like 35 pounds, and they are formidable beasts. I mean, they are predators, those fish. So when they get caught up in that net and then there's wave action, the net gets shredded up. So I used most of my fishing line to actually repair my net. So those were my two most valuable items when it came to food gathering. Of course, the bow goes without saying. That was phenomenal. It put a lot of rabbits and squirrels on the table and gave me a huge sense of pleasure. Trapping wire, not so good, as well as the saw. So the trapping wire and the saw, if I had to go back and do something different, I didn't really need the saw. It made things a little easier, but it could have got by without it pretty well. And the trapping wire I would have switched out for paracord, simply because my trap line was getting devastated by foxes, to the point where I actually just gave up and I focused on hunting and fishing. The foxes, anytime a rabbit was caught in there, those foxes were on it, and I'd come back and there'd be a rabbit without a head. There'd be the whole rabbit taken. Once they dial into it, you are done with. James, I literally would follow their tracks, and they would run my trap line. Like, they would literally track from one trap to the next trap to the next trap. They would do that daily, and they knew exactly what time to do it at. These things are so smart. I just couldn't help but have so much respect for them because they're true survivors. I mean, they are so intelligent. So I gave up on that. So the trapping wire would have been amazing to have switched out for paracord, because I ended up using most of my wire for binding things, and the wire was good, but it was a little tricky to work with. So I would have probably picked paracord. The saw, I would have switched out for a block of salt. Now, believe it or not, a block of salt is an actual item, and I forget exactly. I think it's 2 pounds. A 2-pound block of salt was one item. The reason I would have taken that was, for me, the biggest issue that I had out there, I believe, was lack of minerals, vitamins, electrolytes. I was constantly getting dehydrated, and I had severe insomnia, I believe, from these lack of minerals. And I wonder if I had have had salt and I could have added salt to my meals, if that would have made a huge difference to the well-being of my legs and not having the fatigue that I suffered and the insomnia that I suffered. I know that there's certain things like magnesium and calcium, and sodium that we require to retain water and to be able to sleep well, and for our muscles to stay, hydrated and functional. And I was definitely lacking on some of those things. So I think the salt would have really made a big difference for me.
What kind of arrows did you bring?
So I took their traditional colored carbon fiber arrows. They're made by Black Eagle. Yeah, they're 33 inches. I got a ridiculous wingspan, so great arrows. And then I think I took three bladed broadheads, and then the rest were just the judos for small game.
Okay, so you're shooting 3 blades, huh? I got to talk you out of that at some point.
Yeah, I know. I have bounced back and forth between 2 blade and 3 blade so many times. The 3 blade, I notice I shoot. So the Woodsman's what I use. They're the best ones I've found, but they do make just a very slight whine, as the arrow is rotating, and that whine bothers me because some of these animals that are really sharp in hearing would probably jump the arrow if they heard that from a ways off. So I'm working on it.
Okay. Well, yeah, if you get a non-ventilated broadhead, you can reduce the sound signature of that arrow moving towards an animal, which, you and I both agree that is what an animal is reacting to, is the sound of something flying towards them.
Yeah.
So if it's non-ventilated, it has less turbulence, makes a lot less sound. And those Woodsmans are great. They have a tremendous aspect ratio. They're a very long broadhead and they penetrate well.
Yep.
they just simply don't do as well as a two blade. But that's a conversation for another time.
I'd love you to give me some recommendations on some two blades that you would recommend. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So the block of salt, I am with you because I am a tremendous consumer of salt. And that's something that my wife and I have definitely brought up a few times while watching the show. It's like, yeah, this is something that we would probably bring. But it's tough because you've got 10 items. You're very limited. So, yeah. And you had an axe and a saw. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I had an axe and a saw, which, the axe is mandatory, to fell the big trees and stuff. But the saw just saves those little bit of extra calories, especially when it comes to firewood. So that was kind of the logic. But of course, with these 10 items, in retrospect, I think everyone would change something because you just never know what you're getting into out there.
Right. How did you manage the psychological aspects of it, both in a positive and a negative way? So that if I'm in a trying situation later on, and I can fall back on this lesson that I'm about to receive from you, what works and what does not?
Oh, this answer is something, this sort of topic is something that I somewhat obsessed with and think about a lot. I think, first of all, there is no right or wrong answer because I do believe that as we are all made differently, it's different things that will help us function in those times psychologically. First off, if you are an introverted instead of an extroverted person, well, then you have the added benefit of being comfortable in your own head alone. That's where you're most comfortable. That's how you recharge. You're comfortable with going deep in your thoughts. Being an extrovert, I can tell you right now that an extrovert is going to have a big challenge to deal with the alone aspect. Keeping the mind occupied is going to be something that probably everyone would need to do, whether that be in the sense of being busy with your hands, which is what it was for me, is I like to make things and I like to keep moving. So I want to move my body, and that could just be slow walking, that could be climbing. In my normal life, it's a lot of exercise, like, intense training and stuff. But out there, just to be walking and moving and seeing different things was good enough. I think that for most people, it's just going to be a matter of trying to maintain a positive mental attitude, however you could do that. And that is so much easier said than done. It really is. If you are able to find things that will keep you motivated out there, that's the trick. Now, for me, a lot of the things that I did out there were things that I love to do and I have been doing for a long time. So I kind of set some goals for myself going out there of things that I thought, oh, cool, it'd be nice to build this, it'd be nice to do that. But my goals were more revolved around getting food. I've got a high metabolism. I'm a leaner guy. I knew that my physical capability would be the difficult part to face over the psychological part. So I put a lot of my efforts into hunting and a lot into making things and kept myself busy. And I got to be honest, I had a good time out there. I didn't have a huge challenge with the psychological side. However, there was a moment from about day 7 to day 14. When I say a moment, there was a period from day 7 to day 14 where my mind went through this turmoil of accepting that I could not hear or see any other human beings. But that was the time where I just really made sure that I was busy, and if it kind of popped up in my mind and started to become evident, that I would think to myself, well, what can I do to improve my situation? And so if you've seen, what was that, episode 5, I think, I made a mandolin. Well, the issue I was having was the sound. Like, there was just nothing out there apart from squirrels chirping. And I just had a very hard time dealing with that. So I thought to myself, well, how am I going to improve that situation? and I had this trapping wire, and I kind of just got creative, and I thought, you know what, I'll make a musical instrument. Even though I don't really know how to play a musical instrument, I'll make one anyhow, because to hear any sort of harmonics will improve my situation. And so I made the mandolin, and you don't see footage of it, but I would sit there for hours every night and play the mandolin, sing to myself. Like, just the sound of my own voice seemed to be comforting, but the sound of the mandolin was spectacular. And so a lot of people would look at that and think, well, that wasn't a survival priority. Well, to be honest with you, it was, because that's what kept me sane. It's what kept me motivated. And as long as I'm staying motivated and happy, then I'm still in the game.
Have you stayed in touch with any of the other contestants?
Yes. We actually have a group chat that we're always talking to each other. And it's amazing how many of our experiences are so similar.
Well, that only makes sense, because you're all human beings. You're all skilled, and the skill of the contestants has increased with every season. It's been truly remarkable, and you're in a similar situation, so it only makes sense that your experiences would be very similar as well.
Yes, the common theme among all of us is definitely the level of connection to yourself and to the environment that you experience out there. It's a level of connection that really cannot take place in a weekend or a week. You have to break through a couple of barriers to become primal. I mean, that's kind of the word that comes to mind. Like, you tap into the energy of the land, how it works, and the animal movements, and the wind, the directions it blows from, all these little things which you become part of. And once you feel that true connection out there, it is so substantially like invigorating, that you truly feel that this is exactly what we need to be feeling and experiencing as human beings. And then you get, in my case, plucked out of that environment. Well, plucked. I chose to go, but that was the choice I made. I feel like I didn't really have much of a choice, and that I had to make a logical decision over a heartfelt one. And then you go get put back into society, and then you realize that level of connection out there, that feeling of just being so alive and connected and energized by the environment, you realize that that's something that we should all be feeling on a day-to-day basis, and we don't. And the chances of me getting to that level of connection again are pretty slim. So now I just fight the battle of just trying to maintain, as much of a connection as I can in this world with all the distraction it has.
And it is very jarring to sort of walk out of the wilderness, if you will. Before I went into the Marine Corps, I had a couple months on my hands, and I went back to Montana, where I'd gone to college. I set up a little wall tent, and I hunted for a couple months. And it didn't take me 2 months to shoot, a couple deer and an elk. But I still had a lot of friends there, and they had tags. So, they're kind of rotating through. And I saw only a handful of people and got to spend all this time out there. And then, I go from that environment to, Quantico, flying into Washington, D.C., which, feels like the Jetsons. There's like interstates stacked on top of interstates stacked on top of interstates. And it's so busy and so fast. And then going into the additionally jarring experience of officer candidate school, which is very intense. And I remember my friend Zach Herbert, somebody said something to me, and I stood there and listened to it, and it wasn't a question. They had just said something. So I didn't feel like there was any action required on my part. And Zach said, "Look, man, I know you've been in the woods for a while, but when somebody says something, then you have to say something back. I'm going to walk you through this." So I almost had to get like re-socialized a little bit. And I'm sure that it's been jarring and maybe permanently for you to sort of re-enter society, even though you've had all this experience in the African bush and elsewhere.
It is. It's well, living in society is a constant battle for me. But I do. I want, as much as I want to be a wild person and be able to express the primal side of myself, I also want to have a family, and I want to have friends. I just have to find the balance, and that's the constant struggle. But what I was going to say is, like with when you go out into the woods, do you find that it takes about three? Oh, this can depend on how much action, especially with hunting, because that definitely gets you very much in the zone. But do you find that it takes anywhere from like a day to 4 days for you to kind of acclimatize to the slower pace every time you kind of get out there?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It takes time, and it changes day to day. And if there are distractions waiting for you outside of that realm, if you're worried about car payments or house payments, or whatever it is that you've brought with you that you're not able to get out of your mind, sometimes those things will creep back in. And then there are other times when you can really be immersed in it. And for me, there's times when, by September 20th, I've been with elk so much that, if I hear a bull and then call back to it, I'm not really consciously thinking about that. That's more of a reaction. And it's almost like, yeah, now I'm fluently speaking the second language.
Sure, sure. Yeah, you see, that's the sort of level of connection right there between you and the environment. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's when it becomes like second nature. It's instead of you walking out into the woods and the woods feeling like a foreign place, um, and then as opposed to walking into a city and a city feeling like comfortable and inviting, it's now switched over to the way it should be, is that cities are foreign and you're totally comfortable out in the woods. And this is the dilemma that I think with a lot of people, is that we're looking at the woods and this connection is a scary thing, not as our true home and where we should be.
There's a book called Wilderness and the American Mind. That's a scientific study on the way people from town have viewed the woods, if you will, for a very long time. And it takes references from the Bible and from contemporary literature and goes all the way up to some point in the 1970s is when it was published. And it's very, very interesting when you start thinking about the way people have been taught to fear wilderness for so long. And it's difficult to remove that from people, even if they haven't really been personally taught to fear the wilderness. It's in their mind now that, it's not Mowgli in the Jungle Book. It's everybody else who's afraid to leave the village.
Yes, I'm going to look up that book for sure. But you're absolutely right. It's something that teaching survival skills I've really worked hard at trying to change in people, is to try and look at it as an environment that's homely. And especially when you delve into the bushcraft side of things, which really helps you maintain a sort of relationship again with the natural world, that can start to break down that wall, that fear. And I think a lot of it stems off of one very, very simple thing, and that is spending a night in the woods on your own. There's something about sleeping in the dark woods that will put fear in most people, both big burly grown men and petite women. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. There tends to be a fear for predators and the dark and the unknown in the woods. And so, something that comes to the answer that comes to mind, you asked a question earlier about the psychological state of being out there and, what you could take home from that. I honestly think that the biggest and recommendation I would have for anyone to sort of prepare themselves psychologically for something like what I experienced on a Loon would be to go out into the woods on your own and to sleep in the woods without a tent, under the stars, exposed, even if it was one night. If you could do a 2 night, if you could do a week, great. But really, that alone you would break down so many walls and so many barriers and really learn a lot about yourself. And that's the key, because we need to have quiet time in the woods where we can really focus on who we are, where we are in life, what we're doing. And we just don't seem to get that with all the distraction in this modern world. So,
and that's the real experience of quiet time, in my opinion, is not the ear, just listening to the world around you and the subtleties of sound. We're not talking about music or television or, the static of conversation and vehicles and everything else. It's listening to the subtleties of the environment, but it's also listening to yourself at the same time and the way you're reacting to that. And for me, that is what quiet time is, and I do need it. I absolutely need it, and I need it much more regularly than a lot of people do, I think.
Yeah, that's why guys like you and I are a woman's worst nightmare. So I don't know if you're married, but my wife deserves a Medal of Honor. I mean, she, I just have to tap out all the time. Like I'm tapping out of the family right now, and I'm going to tap back into the wilderness. Just give me 3 days, and I'll come back a new man.
Yep, and I will bring you all of the meat. Like here you go. This is the bargain. Well, Joel, you're a fascinating human. It's been wonderful to talk to you, and I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you setting an example and demonstrating a way to live that is both educational and inspiring and entertaining for us on this television show. And for those who are interested in knowing more about it, you can click on the link that is in the show description, and you can go get to spend some time with Joel and the Hadza people and change your life.
Well, thank you, James. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about some interesting and important topics, I would say. And it's website's bushsurvivaltraining.com, and I'll get that link over to you in a text soon. But thank you very much, brother. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. This episode was edited by Emily Brannigan, with original music written and performed by Justin Hay. Artwork for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatterlin and digitized by Celia Christofferson. If you enjoyed the show, I encourage you to share it with a friend and subscribe. You can find photos and more content on Instagram at Six Ranch Podcast. I'll catch you next week.